Nintendo's Switch 2 console is just a few months away from hitting store shelves, and a lot of people are not happy. Not because of the hardware, not due to the footage of games that have already been showcased, but because of the price. The console is set to drop in June 2025 with a sticker price of $449 in the US. And it's not just the price of the console itself that has Nintendo fans up in arms, but also the games. Top-tier games will reportedly sell for $80, with some reports suggesting $90 for physical copies. Although there seems to be some confusion about whether or not that's true, and it has not been confirmed by Nintendo just yet. That sounds pretty steep, but how do these prices stack up when compared to the NES, the N64, and all the other console and game prices in the company's history? Let's find out. Way back in 1985, Nintendo released its first console in the US, the Nintendo Entertainment System, for $199 USD. While that would be an amazing price in 2025, when adjusted for inflation, it would equate to $591 if released today. Quite a bit more than the price of the upcoming Switch 2 when considering inflation. When it comes to games, although there were a few titles that would go as high as $60 or more, they mostly range between $29 and $49, or about $89 to nearly $148 in today's dollars. No wonder my parents didn't buy me one until Christmas of 1990. Next up, in 1989, Nintendo debuted their first handheld console, with much success when they released the Game Boy for $89, with games ranging mostly between $29 and $39. In 2025 money, you'd be looking at $229 for the console, with games going somewhere between $77 to $103. Nintendo kicked off the 90s in North America with its 16-bit Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1991. Its retail price, just like its predecessor, the NES, $199. New games generally sold from $49 to $59, again with a few exceptions. That's about $467 for the console and between $117 and $140 for a game if released today. By the mid-90s, Nintendo would release the disaster known as Virtual Boy. With a lifespan of only 1 year in North America, the tabletop console launched for $179, with games selling between $25 and $50. Adjusted to 2025 pricing, the Virtual Boy would cost you $377, with games ranging between $52 and $104. Next up, the Nintendo 64. Originally named Ultra 64 and sporting probably the weirdest controller of all time, the company dropped their new 64-bit console for a cool $199 again, equating to $405 adjusted for inflation. Games would typically set you back about $60, which would be about $122 today. In 1998, after releasing a few smaller revisions of the original Game Boy, Nintendo dropped the Game Boy Color, selling for $89 or $176 adjusted for inflation. Games ran from $29 to $39, or between $58 and $78 if released in 2025. The new spin on the Game Boy console would be short-lived, with the Game Boy Advance releasing just 3 years later. In 2001, Nintendo finally began moving away from cartridges when it debuted the GameCube for just, you guessed it, $199. Not a bad deal at all if you consider inflation, which would put it around $361 in 2025 money. And those teeny tiny little discs, unique to the new console, would typically run you $49 or about $90 today. Also in 2001, Nintendo dropped a 32-bit successor to the Game Boy, called Game Boy Advance, for $99 or around $180 if released in 2025. Cartridges for the new handheld would go for about $30 to $35 or $54 to $63 adjusted for inflation. Just 3 years after the release of the Advance, Nintendo quickly moved on to the soon-to-be extremely successful DS. With a launch price of $149, the DS would cost you about $253 if released today. games would range from $29 to $39, which would be around $50 to $67 in 2025 dollars. With an approach designed to appeal to a wider audience, Nintendo would go the innovative route with the release of the Wii in 2006. The retail price for the console, if you could get your hands on one, $249, and the games, $49 for most titles. With 19 years of inflation considered, you'd be looking at about $395 for the console and about $71 for games in 2025. In 2011, Nintendo would continue the legacy of the DS with a new 3D version, this time selling for $249 retail, with most games selling for $39. That's about $354 for a console and $56 for a 3DS game when adjusted for inflation.
With the all-new Wii U, this is how you'll play next. On 2 screens.
After a very successful run with the Wii, Nintendo released what would become its second least successful console of all time, if you count the Virtual Boy, in 2012, the Wii U. Due to a mixture of poor and confusing marketing, limited third-party support, and a weak lineup of launch games, most gamers didn't upgrade to a Wii U. Those who did paid a retail price of $299, $416 in today's money, and purchased games for $59, equivalent to $83 in 2025. In 2017, Nintendo struck gold with the Switch, perhaps the console the Wii U wanted to be. At the time, the innovative new console went for $299, which would equate to $390 today. Most full-sized games retailed for around $60 or $78 if released today. In summary, unless Nintendo decides to make any last-minute changes to its pricing, the Switch 2 is set to become the third most expensive console in the company's history, coming in just behind the SNES and way behind the original NES, which, when adjusted for inflation, is by far the most expensive console in the history of Nintendo. And for the games, if the $80 price for top-tier games holds, Switch 2 games will come in right between the Wii U and the original Switch, adjusted for inflation. If there is indeed a $90 price tag on physical copies, it'll be tied with the GameCube and the Game Boy. SNES games come in at the most expensive, with an average of what would have been equivalent to about $128 in 1991. So while not the most expensive system in the history of Nintendo, it's still a bit of a jump up from where the original Switch launched back in 2017, with games slightly more expensive considering 8 years of inflation.